Eh, yo estoy tratando, pero es un poco peligroso con agua. Vaya, espérame.
A hollow, cut out in a steep cliff under an overhanging rock. A safe place, perfectly sheltered from wind, rain, and possible predators, but hard and dangerous to reach. Is this where two young Dutch women, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, spend their final days after they became lost and injured in the desolate cloud forests of the Panamanian Talamanca region? Join us for the second episode in the footsteps of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. On the 1st of April 2014, Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon never returned after embarking on what should have been a relatively easy 4-hour hike up to the top of the Continental Divide in Boquete, Panama. The weather that day was absolutely perfect, dry and sunny after one of the longest dry periods in local history. And it may well be that this exceptionally good weather was one of the reasons why the two young women did not turn back at the top of the Mirador, as they were supposed to do, but instead continued on along the Pianista Trail, descending into the dense tropical cloud forests on the Atlantic side. But the terrain on the Atlantic side of the Continental Divide is totally different from that on the Pacific side. And while the Boquete side is densely populated and cultivated, the Talamanca region consists of miles and miles of dense tropical forest, with treacherous slopes and deep ravines. A harsh wilderness. Dressed in shorts and carrying only a small backpack with a few snacks, Kris and Lisanne were ill-prepared for a hike in such terrain, and they lacked the experience to fully understand what risks they were taking. Beyond the Mirador, they went outside mobile phone range, and from that moment on, they were on their own. Several months later, their backpack and a few of their remains were recovered on the shores of the Chanquinola River near the village of Alto Romero. And from the pictures on their camera, it could be established that Kris and Lisanne made it as far as the first stream crossing, a walk of about 45 minutes beyond the top of the Mirador. But then the pictures from that day stop, and image 509, which might have shown us what happened next, is missing. Perhaps because the camera became damaged or wet immediately after taking that picture. The logs from their mobile phones show that 2.5 hours after taking their last daylight picture, 2 attempts were made to call the Dutch alarm number 112. And with long intervals, further call attempts were made on April 2nd and 3rd. But there was no signal, and the calls failed to connect. Perhaps realizing that alarm calls were useless due to the lack of mobile phone signal, Kris and Lisanne did not make any further calls after April 3rd, searching for other methods to attract the attention of search teams. This may be the reason why, in the very early morning of April 8th, they made a mysterious series of 100 flashlight pictures at a desolate place which since has become known as the night location. Pointing upward in seemingly erratic directions, the pictures might be a byproduct of using the camera flash to signal for help. Where was this place, and why were they signaling with their camera at 1:30 in the night when everyone was asleep, instead of at a more logical time? Hundreds of YouTube videos and thousands of theories have been proposed over the years to explain the night pictures. But perhaps at last we are getting close to an answer. Kris, her shorts were found along the river shore, right next to the second cable bridge, at a distance of 4 kilometers from the location of their last daylight picture, while the backpack was found 6 kilometers further along the shore of the same river. The night pictures must have been made somewhere in between these locations, but what route did Kris and Lisanne take, and why didn't they turn back along the same trail as they should have done? After a lengthy study of the terrain and several expeditions, there are basically 2 theories which explain what may have happened to Kris and Lisanne. The first theory, which we explained in a previous video, states that they falsely assumed the trail was a loop, and instead of turning back, continued to follow the trail until they became injured during the crossing of the main river at the first cable bridge, an injury which prevented them from turning back and forced them to follow the river downstream until they perished somewhere between the first and the second cable bridge. Although this theory is very well possible, it fails to explain why nobody noticed the girls during this long trek, and why villagers who walked the trail on April 2nd and 3rd found no sign of them. If they got into trouble right next to the trail, why were they never found? The second theory states that Kris and Lisanne were well aware that they had to turn back and return via the same route, but that they left the trail shortly after their last daylight picture and subsequently became lost in the forest. Unable to find their way back to the trail, they then started following the water, and after they perished somewhere along this route, the current carried their remains and belongings to the river and Alto Romero. This theory has the benefit that it explains why nobody was able to find the 2 young women, and why they stopped taking pictures immediately after passing the first stream. But it leaves open the question why Kris and Lisanne left the trail. Did they accidentally fall down one of the slopes, ending up injured and unable to climb back up? Or were they chased off the trail by some animal or person? Sadly, it is possible we will never know. However, although we know all about the trail, we know very little about the route along the streams. So in order to get a better assessment of which theory is the most likely, we needed more information about the route along the stream. Was such a route possible? And what obstacles would they have to pass along the way? One of the first things we discovered is that if you follow the stream from the place where their last daylight picture was taken, in less than 100 meters it takes you to a waterfall, and then 100 meters further to a second waterfall. With extreme low water, you might perhaps be able to climb down, but there would be a high risk of injury, and without gear, it is unlikely you will be able to climb back up. So, returning to the stream crossing is impossible. So it is possible that Kris and Lisanne somehow heard about these waterfalls and subsequently fell down while trying to take a selfie at the edge of the water? Accidents like that have happened all too often before, and it would explain the fractures in Lisanne's her foot, as well as the camera failure while taking image 509. But it is also possible the young women accidentally fell down one of the steep slopes next to the trail on their way back up toward the Mirador. As Romain's recent expedition shows, an injury is very well possible during such a fall, and there is a chance you might not be able to climb back up. In all cases, the end result would be the same. No matter how or why they left the trail, they would always end up along the riverbed of the first stream, with no possible route back to the trail. Inexperienced, without proper gear and dressed in shorts, they would not be able to cut themselves a route through the dense forest, and the slightest injury would probably prevent them from climbing up the steep slopes of the river shore. The only option open to them would be to follow the water downstream in the hope it would lead them to safety. Sadly, the water would lead them straight to the rapids, a deep canyon with steep slopes and several fierce waterfalls. Situated just over 1 kilometer from the trail, this place could easily become a trap for the young women, certainly if they were already injured. In April 2023, while scouting out this area, our drones found a sheltered location halfway down this deep canyon, which showed a lot of similarities with the pictures taken by Kris and Lisanne on April 8, 2014. Could this be the mysterious night location? If you get past the rapids, the terrain will become more benign as you approach the paddocks of Monterey. Although the farmhouses are hidden behind hills and you might miss them, there is a trail which crosses the stream and runs straight to these cabins. So, would Kris and Lisanne have kept following the stream, or would they have turned into the trail? It is hard to say, but if they walked up the paddocks, they would surely have been found. If Kris and Lisanne became trapped in the deep canyon of the rapids and perished at this place, the current will eventually take their remains and belongings to the river and the village of Alto Romero. But if they traveled beyond the rapids, it becomes harder to explain why they were not found. Another item which strongly points towards the rapids comes from the vegetation we can see in the night pictures. The forked tree, clearly visible in many of the pictures, is almost certainly a heliocarpus, and such trees only grow in an altitude range of 1,300 till 1,500 meters. They are rarely found at lower altitudes, such as near the second cable bridge. Our locations D and E, which mark the canyon of the rapids, are within this altitude range, but if you go down to Monterey, you are already on the lower edge of this area. And although these trees can be found along Rio Mame, they get more and more rare as the river reaches lower altitudes. So purely based on the vegetation seen in the night pictures, there is a strong case for the night location being located along a wider stream or river somewhere within this red search area, or at least very close to it. And then there is one last item which is truly a real mystery. For after a night of deep silence, Kris and Lisanne made their first alarm call on April 2nd at 6:58 local time, which is less than half an hour after local sunrise. Despite many wild theories, we have no way of knowing why the two young women chose to remain silent during the night. But the fact that they started calling again immediately after sunrise indicates they were waiting for daylight. Somehow, daylight was important to them, and they were sitting there, waiting for sunrise before they started up their phone. But in a mountainous region such as this, many areas will remain in the shadow of nearby hills and mountains for a long time while the sun slowly rises in the sky. And if Kris and Lisanne were indeed waiting for sunrise, this means that at 6:58 the sun must just have become visible to them. Now, this is something we can calculate, for there is a wonderful app which allows us to view which spots within an area are inside or outside sunlight. And if we project this map on the search area, we get an amazing result. Within the area accessible to Kris and Lisanne, there are only 3 places in sunlight on the 2nd of April at 6:58. The first of these is the old Refugio shelter near the first cable bridge, which has often been mentioned as a possible place where Kris and Lisanne might have spent their first night. The second location is an old storage shed on the small paddock which no longer exists, but which was still there in April 2014, within sight of the trail and less than half an hour walking from their last known location. And perhaps not surprising, the third daylight spot is our little valley halfway down the canyon of the rapids. All the other spots, which are frequently named like the Belt Area, Rio Mame, or Monte Rey, are all still in darkness at the time of the first alarm call on April 2nd. So, if our theory that the girls waited for sunlight is correct, then they must have spent their first night in one of these 3 locations. Sadly, none of this gives a definite answer as to what route the 2 young women took, but there is every indication that if they left the trail somewhere between the Mirador and the paddocks, the night location is most likely in the canyon of the rapids. So, there was every reason to take a better look at this place, which we asked Romain to do in June 2025. In the first episode, we already showed some of the footage. But since that time, so many new theories and videos have appeared that it is useful to take a second, far more detailed look at this canyon, starting with the arrival of Romain and his team. As we have shown in episode 1, Romain and his team managed to reach the rapids, taking a detour through the forest to avoid the worst parts of the stream. However, without local knowledge and proper gear, it is unlikely Kris and Lisanne would have been able to do the same, and if they entered this place via the stream, an accident and injuries are very likely. After cutting through the forest, the team entered the canyon just downstream of the first of the rapids, before following the stream through the deep canyon toward the valley we found earlier. Although the drone analysis had already told us the canyon was very deep, its near vertical walls still remain imposing, while at the same time emphasizing the feeling of being trapped and the danger of sudden flash floods washing through this place. Very interesting and encouraging was also the instant sight of several heliocarpus trees rising above the vegetation on the canyon walls. The forked tree, which is visible in the night pictures, is almost certainly heliocarpus as well. These trees grow only in a narrow altitude band, so the fact that they are abundantly present here in the canyon is encouraging. After finding their way through the vegetation along the edge of the cliff, the team reaches the valley originally discovered by our drone. In April 2023, our drone spotted some large boulders in a pattern which resembles that of the night location, but that position was higher up this slope and invisible from our present location. With the dense vegetation and steep slope, going there will not be easy, and we will have to leave this for a later expedition. Besides, if the night location is somewhere up this slope, then Kris and Lisanne likely reached this place via another route, going down from the paddocks in the north, and not upward from this canyon. Still, in the bright sunlight, this place looks a lot more friendly than the entrance of the canyon. And if you are searching for a place where a passing helicopter would be able to see you, then this might be your best chance. Although situated right next to the stream, the steeply overhanging canyon wall should offer protection against wind and rain. Like many places in the Talamanca, this place is literally beautiful and foreboding at the same time. As we turn the corner, another towering forked heliocarpus tree becomes visible, rising up like a big advertisement sign. A more detailed look, however, shows us there is not one, but at least 3 of these twisted heliocarpus trees, one of which is on the right shore and seems to show a far better resemblance to the tree visible in the night pictures. Perhaps the biggest problem in this canyon is that the place is literally crawling with forked trees protruding out from the canyon walls. And after 11 years, huge changes to vegetation are likely. There is no doubt the vegetation has grown and become more dense, making things harder to recognize, but nothing had prepared us for the fact that there might be more than one forked heliocarpus tree. As yet, though, this seems to be the best candidate. Of course, we need to take into account that we are not seeing the tree under the same angle as we would see it from right below. However, due to the much denser vegetation, the tree itself is now much harder to see from right below. As the team rounds the corner, it is clear that large areas which were completely dry on the drone footage from April are now underwater. Given the drone footage, there is no doubt all of this must have been dry in April 2014. When we started studying the night pictures, we soon suspected the place had to be in a sharp turn of the stream. But this footage makes it all the more clear how extremely sharp this turn truly is, something which makes the location all the more complicated to understand. Something else, which was not clear in the footage shown during the first episode, is how high and steep the shore to this little beach above the waterfall truly is. From the viewpoint of the beach itself, it looks as if we are almost on the same level as the water, but this is not true. This raises the suspicion that what we see in image 542 is this bank, but there might be other candidates.
Gracias.
The forked tree is definitely one of the most difficult items. It is there, and its general shape seems to match, but the vegetation around it has grown, making it harder to see. And to get the same angle, we will need to stand further to the left and more toward the center of the waterfall, which is now totally covered by water. The very bad quality of the leaked night pictures is also a problem here. The forked tree is very weak in all pictures. We can see its main shape, but not every single branch, certainly not the smaller branches. Combined with all the other vegetation behind it and possible changes during the past 11 years, which is now complicating the situation. Most surprisingly, something else becomes visible on the opposite shore, well clear of the high water mark. Could this be the entrance to a cave? There has often been discussion on how Kris and Lisanne kept warm during the cold nights and relatively dry during the heavy rains which followed later. And a cave would be the perfect answer. If they were injured, they may not have had much choice on how much further they could walk, and this sharp turn offered a much better chance of being seen by passing helicopters, while a cave would offer them relatively safe shelter. There was no way for Kris and Lisanne to know that continuing along the stream would get them to Monte Rey. And, if we assume that with the extreme low water levels the waterfall was almost completely dry, this may have been the best place to stay and wait for rescue. safe and well above high water levels, a hollow like this would offer ample space for 2 persons to camp out. But at first sight, we find no indication that Kris and Lisanne ever stayed here. Although perhaps, after 11 years, that is too much to expect, and the place would need to be searched far more thoroughly to make certain. After exploring the canyon of the rapids, Romain and his team continued on following the first stream, and subsequently followed Rio Mame, eventually even visiting Alto Romero, although not all of that final trajectory was along the river. In separate videos on his own YouTube channel, Romain will later document this whole voyage, together with some very interesting finds along the way. For this channel and series, we still have footage from one potential location along Rio Mame, which we will show you in a further episode in this series. So, did we find the night location? It is way too early to give any definite answer. There are some interesting similarities, but also a lot of differences, and no doubt there is going to be lots and lots of discussion on this. If you are interested in joining this discussion, we encourage you to log into the subreddit, a link to which you will find in the description of this video. It should be remembered, though, that the main purpose of this expedition was not so much finding the night location, as well as exploring the canyon of the rapids, and there are still large areas of this canyon which are barely searched, or which could not be reached due to the high water levels. And although this particular spot might not be the location we are looking for, the canyon itself, with its high walls and airy, similar vegetation, remains highly interesting, giving the impression that the real location might be just around the corner. We will no doubt return to this canyon in the future, but organizing these expeditions is both very expensive and time-consuming. And before we rush off for a second look, it is better to further analyze all footage we have now. And, as mentioned, there is still a lot more to come from Romain. It should be emphasized, though, that these expeditions are not only expensive, but they definitely aren't without risk either. This terrain is unforgiving, and there are large predators about. You should never enter areas such as this without local guides, proper gear, emergency beacons, first aid gear, and lots of experience. Sadly, Kris and Lisanne perished. We can't save them anymore. So the absolute least we can do is make certain there are not going to be any accidents in their name. The search for the night location is not something worth risking your life for. Finally, but definitely most importantly, we need to say a tremendously big thank you to Romain, without whom none of this would ever have been possible. It is easy to design theories, sitting behind the computer, but Romain has been the one who actually went there to get all the footage and data. If we ever will be able to confirm this place as the real night location, then all the praise for finding the place should go to Romain. Praise should also go to our sponsor, who generously offered to pay a large part of the expenses for this expedition. Our YouTube channels are not monetized, and we are not making any money out of documentaries like this. But there is still a lot of money involved in these expeditions, and gifts like this are always extremely welcome.